Thank you. We are starting with policy committee first. We are going to start with public comment. According to policy 903, public comment on matters of concern, official action, or deliberation is limited to 3 minutes and should be directed to the entire school board following the announcement of your name and municipality. Under this policy, the presiding officer has authority to warn or stop a public commenter in violation of this policy occurs. So we have one commenter, Jonathan Russell.
So sorry to move this. You. All right, Jonathan Russell, Hilltown Township, and I'm speaking on policy 235.1, dealing with surveys. I think it's important to clear up some of the issues that were discussed at the last meeting, and I just wanted to go over those. First, having our children participate in third-party surveys such as the PAY survey is an extracurricular activity. No state dollars are conditioned upon us administering these surveys, and in fact, over 900 schools exempt themselves from the PAY survey across the Commonwealth. A third-party survey is a non-school related activity and should be handled like all other extracurricular activities. They are not central to the education of our children. You need to obtain our permission for our children to participate, not to opt out, but to opt in. When we drop off our children in school, we're giving your permission to teach them. Third-party surveys are not within the scope of our permission. We're not giving consent to mine our children for data to be used by third parties outside the district. Consent is not implied. You need to obtain affirmative consent to opt in. And thinking about this, it seems like it's being a little bit sneaky to have the opt-in versus, or have the opt-out versus the opt-in. It almost feels like you can't convince the parents of the importance of this. So by defaulting it to opt-out, it's almost like you're selling a service, and you're hoping that we won't cancel after a certain period of time. If you feel like you're able to convince us, then you should stick with the opt-in as opposed to the opt-out. The opt-out option makes it seem like you don't trust the parents of Penridge to do what you think is best. In so doing, the majority of you are falling into the same mentality that you railed against to get elected. You think you know better than the parents. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, hubris is not a characteristic of good leadership. Along these lines, have you even checked with our teachers to see that whether they want to be proctors for third-party surveys, and whether they welcome less classroom instructional time with their students? Again, you're falling into the same trappings that the majority of you campaigned against. Second, from Mr. Word's comments at the last board meeting, it sounded as if he's preparing the public for a possible tax increase. Can you really ask for a tax increase while you change a district policy that would take teachers and students off of task and away from instructional time? How can you use district resources for non-district activities while telling the residents of Penridge that you need more of our money to teach our children? It's a bad look, and it's not a good use of district resources. For these reasons, I would encourage you not to change the policy, but if you do, and if you're bent on doing so, make it an opt-in as opposed to an opt-out. Thank you.
That is it for public comment. First up, we have the policy update plan. So since we met the last time, we have second read for surveys, second read for sabbatical. Responsible contractor, this is something, that we updated this to July. We give ourselves a timeline in the summer to try and get this back on everyone's calendar just because we don't want to keep slipping, but recognizing that with a new director of operations, we would give him a minute to get up to speed. For cell phone usage, we decided to move this, to start this in student services, where it would be a discussion that starts there. If it seems like some sort of policy is forming, then obviously it would come back here, but starting it in student services first, so we get an idea of how students are using their cell phones already, just the realistic ways that teachers could police cell phones. My understanding is rather difficult to do in the classroom sometimes. So the next one is conduct and disciplinary procedures. I put this as NA because this was addressed with updates to administrative regulations and the HR, some HR updates also. The dressing room is listed on there.
No what?
cell phone usage in school. If they review that, not sure we have to change it, but the youngest generation is familiar with that. And I do see teachers can set their own, right now, the way it's set up, teachers decide in each classroom which way it's named. And, I'm sure some classes were 12 and some classes. Just something I think we need to discuss.
Great.
So are you okay with it starting in student services, like, do you
Oh,
on that, or?
Yeah, we need to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sure. That's,
All right, so up first, we have second read for surveys.
yes.
There you go.
I'll begin. So again, as Mr. Rash just indicated, we're going to do the second reading for 235.1 surveys. And I think the starting point is the clarification that this particular policy will focus solely on third-party surveys. And you see that reflected on the purpose. The second piece of this policy relates to the definitions. And for this particular part of it, when we last reviewed during the first reading, we talked about what it meant to identify protected information. And this is, federal. So if you look at the different, 7 different categories that are listed above, that's what that particular protected information speaks to. And it's the protection, as it shows, protection of people's rights and members. So that's not a change also. It's directly from what was written in the policy prior to this first reading and second reading. Much of what is struck through relates to the authority as well as language related to controversial issues and surveys. The third-party surveys that would be reviewed by the superintendent, assistant superintendent, myself in my role as director of student services, our teaching and learning department. But ultimately it would be the recommendation from the superintendent to the board if we were to go with any type of third-party survey. So all that language relates to controversial surveys. Any questions thus far?
Can you remind the public, is this a PSBA policy?
Yes.
It is 235.1, right?
No.
No. So 235.1, PSBA doesn't actually have a policy on it. This is just something that I presume the last board initiated. And it sounds like it was based off of third-party surveys that were being investigated by the district.
No, it came from the Independence Law Center. It started as a survey called Controversial Issues, and then it was moved into surveys.
So again, if you look at guidelines, again, a lot of language there relates to controversial issues in third-party surveys. Again, all that information was struck through. And I'll just leave it up there.
Can I ask why we removed opting out?
So it was opt-in, so you as a parent would tell us you want your child to take this survey.
Right.
Whereas now we're moving to an opt-out. You have to let us know and notify you that you don't want your child to take this survey. And shortly, as I scroll through, you'll see the language. We'll do a notification at the start of the year. We didn't define what the start of the year means, but the important part of that is that upfront knowledge of these are the surveys that we have planned as a district that are third-party surveys. So you know early on in the school year, and then leading up to the actual implementation of the survey, students completing the survey, we would notify parents no later than 10 days prior
and I don't know, maybe I missed the meeting, or I know I did, but, we were gonna have it on the front page of the website, when you filled in your beginning school, my kid can take Tylenol, my kid can be photographed. We're just gonna have it right there. Why are we changing from that?
That's how it is currently doing it. It wasn't proposed to keep that. The proposal was to get it off of our school in the beginning of the year and make it that a person has to, parent has to actively.
But why that makes it harder for the parent? Why not just have it right out there and be completely upfront? And if you don't want your kids to do third-party surveys, here, you just check that box right then.
I believe, and I'm hearing it correctly, is because that's in the beginning of the year, so that whenever these surveys are given out, parents are going to be told, these are the surveys that your child, whatever grader is going to get, so that they know, so that we're informing parents, because that's always what we do, informing parents. And then 10 days before, they're also given another email or however it comes out, CSL saying, this is the survey again that your child can, and then you can opt out. So the parents are always told not just once. I don't know if it's because in the beginning of the year, I don't know, it's really just the pace is my understanding.
It's worded vaguely, but I think third-party survey. Parents, obviously, most don't even know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, it means better to let them see the survey, and it also has been proven that it's statistically, the results are not accurate.
No, I know, yeah, I'm saying opt out, but do we know ahead of time, like, do you know what surveys we'll do next year?
I would be inclined to say that we would issue the pay survey next year. It would be very clear that we're not going to become survey. I don't want our kids taking nonstop third-party surveys as that will take away from instructional time. However, I do see some value in the pay survey. Grade levels of the pay survey, so sixth grade, eighth grade. We may not want to do it with our younger kids. We may want to do it with our high school kids to start. And it will be very clear. We will post a survey on our website in advance. We will send a notification home. Would you like your child to participate? If you don't, it's okay. We make other accommodations for those students. Just like when we have field trips, we have assembly programs, parents have the opportunity to opt their child out of these programs. So I don't anticipate lots and lots of surveys coming to parents. I think there's parents would be, I've had contact, there's a misconception that we would be surveying kids nonstop. I don't think that would be the case, but I do think there's some valuable data that we can glean from these surveys as well. In addition, if you look at some of our coursework at the high school, AP capstone, student courses, AP research, AP seminar, students issue surveys to other students. We're talking about cell phone usage. All right, so let's get away from our students for a second. I anticipate our teachers will be surveyed, in particular at the high school level, to find out their opinions to help us inform our practice. We can sit up here, talk about the next generation, the pros and cons, but we do want definitely get feedback from our faculty and staff. There's a building climate survey that we issued last week to all of our entire staff, bus drivers, administrative assistants, teachers, administrators, to help us inform our practice. So we see a lot of value in surveys, and you can certainly take a look at case surveys. You can take a couple of questions and say it's inappropriate. But parents, you have the right. You say, my child will not take that survey, and we will ensure that.
I just feel like there's so many emails from the school, it's so easy to miss stuff.
I don't know what to say, how to address that. We want outflow of communication. We want to be informative. We put this on our website. I'll send a notification to principals, will, and we'll do our best. And the beauty of this is it feels high stakes, feels high pressure. Your child does not have to take a survey. Just remember that. Your child does not, if you have strong convictions against any third-party survey, don't have your child take it.
I think to also add, the child does not have to complete every question several third-party surveys that are being investigated by the district. It's one. And I think it would be helpful for us as a school district to have information about how kids feel about school, what their attitudes are about school. That's the main purpose for us and our main focus, not necessarily the questions pertaining to the home environment, but that's all equally important when you consider how we can best support kids that may not have a home environment like yours, where your children are very supported, you know what they're doing. That may not be the case in every home, so it kind of helps our school counselors, our social workers know how to attack different situations in the home. And remember, it is anonymous. I don't think we mentioned that at this point, but it is an anonymous survey and it's not tied to any one kid. And if we think back to the first reading, even one of Ms. Bromber's questions or concerns was about how do you really attack a problem? You don't know the specific kid that it's about, but when you look at it globally, let's say we get 88% of the 10th grade class taking it, that can help inform our practices, similar to what Angela talked about with this climate survey that was just instituted for the faculty, all different transportation, administrative assistants. There's value in this, but at the end of the day, you as parents have the right to say, I don't care what value you think there is, my kid or my children are not going to take any third-party survey, pays, or anything else that the district investigates 3 to 4 years down the line. Because there could be something else that we find might help support kids and their education and their mental health.
What's the allotted time for the test? Do we know how long it takes?
I believe the pay survey is roughly 45 to 60 minutes. It's once it's online now.
Okay.
And I will say that I have used pay data specifically for things like grants. So when you're getting grants from the state and the county, they're going to look for you to have actual data. So it's going to be one that I was on was like tobacco and alcohol consumption. So you want to show like, okay, we do have a specific issue. We're having these kinds of numbers reported over the last few years from the pay survey. We know that X number of kids are using a particular thing. Then when we're looking for money to support things, whether it's for safety and security, for any kind of programs, we need to have that data to support those specific grants. So that's how I use it. And that's really probably the biggest benefit that we have. It helps us go out there and get the money to support.
So if a parent opts their child out, what is the child doing during that time period? They sit in class, read a
So
book?
it could be a study period in the library. Obviously, depending on the number of kids that opt out, we'll have to make decisions. But I would imagine that it would be some sort of study period. There could be an opportunity for, if we have teachers now, if obviously look at the collective bargaining agreement, teachers who may be assigned to work with those kids, and it could be, tutoring sessions. Again, we have to make sure, the CBA is in line with that, and that would speak to the teachers and some.
I know when I was talking to my son, it was in the middle school, when it was not the long period, which is their free period, so they're not missing instructional time and that kind of stuff.
So at the secondary level, for example, maybe we could do something where we have some of the grants period to use whether or not it's the value of the So there are options there.
Just as an aside for practical reality, to move away from the haze, in the language of both of these, and I'm just thinking from a day-to-day function and other types of surveys that we might want to have, because this is not the only one. Let's say we wanted to do a PBIS fidelity survey. It's coming from the IU. Would that fall under this policy? If I'm a teacher planning an anticipatory set, and I want to do, would you have supported Hamilton or Jefferson? And I find a cool survey online that I can use that some other teachers already created. Would this apply to that as well? So just, we tend to be very focused on this one survey, and I understand because it hits a lot of emotional buttons for
But that's an excellent question. I do think, you could have a classroom survey through the bus that when you're talking about PBIS, and there'd be a lot of value in that.
For those that don't know the acronyms, that's positive behavioral interventions and support. I know you know for the cameras.
But I would feel more comfortable if the parents were made aware of that survey, so they are aware of the questions that are being asked of the students in that class. So, we're going to be 100% transparent in all of our surveys, just to ensure that we are compliant. But I would view alongside you any other entity as a third party. So we're remaining congruent compliant with this policy. There's another very popular survey through the University of Pennsylvania, Sense of Belonging Survey, third-party survey. I use that in other school districts. Value in that survey, but I'm not sure if we
And that's an aside with something like SIP PBIS. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if we did not have nearly full community participation in a survey like that, we'd get dinged on something like that in terms of our fidelity to the program, correct?
Yes.
So that would be very difficult for you as administrators to have to then chase down opt-in. So let's say we sent out an email offering opt-in, opt-out, and we need to try and get people to participate. That would end up taking a lot of administrative time, a lot of teacher time, if it's opt-in, because you then have to track down each individual person, call them for their participation in that survey, try to get those forms returned, versus an opt-out for something innocuous like that. It's not. I doubt you would have many people who necessarily want to opt their child out of that specific type of survey, but it simply makes sure that your participation rate is present.
What are we talking about? This behavioral survey?
So positive behavioral interventions and supports is a program to help schools encourage behavior children, sponsored through most IUs. One of the things that they are very interested in is making sure that they have full community engagement of the school, all of your administration, all of your teachers, all of your students. Everybody knows and understands what the expectations of the school building are and how the school building works. And one of the ways that they will sometimes do that is through some sort of a survey, where that they may ask to be administered to teachers within the school, they may ask to be administered to some students.
So are we doing that today? Okay. And teachers are very different than students. So when you threw me off when you were saying about fidelity of a program, and if there's not full participation.
But for instance, when you were coming up with like your PBIS program, so your children have a voice in that program. It's an important part of what the program is built on.
Okay.
And I think to Bradley's point, when the policy was created and made opt-in, all surveys stopped. It was never truly tested to see if it was able to be implemented in that way, to the point of tracking down on a student level what the responses are, making sure they're having proper access. Just no more surveys were done too. And so there was a lot of concern, I believe, from administration at the time and from the public, how you would be able to implement that when it came down to who was sitting there taking the survey and who's not. And if they don't answer, what do we do?
Well, that's my question. So if there's an email that says we're going to do a PACE survey next Friday, and you don't reply, then your child would take the survey unless you reply, I don't want my child to take the survey. So what is the downside to having that just right in the beginning of the year? You just either do or don't want your kids taking it. Wouldn't it make it simpler? Huh?
It's just a third-party service, skip right over.
Doesn't even apply to all these students.
The parent isn't given all of the actual information, so they're already saying yes or no, but they don't know what it entails. And what we're saying is that when the email is given out just more than once, twice, the PACE or whatever survey would be attached, so that the parent has the time. And even before last year, I remember when we were giving multiple notifications that it was, if you wanted to opt out, then you could opt out. I think just, because I'm one of those parents, I would want to know what it is that's on there. And I remember first week, I opted myself out. I would bring the whole survey, but I was asking, because they're oldest and they don't know, and I asked other parents, and they kind of looked at me like, you actually read the survey? I mean, my kids, I was the only one that opted out, which is fine. I did what I felt was good for my child and everyone else, but I thought it was great. I had wonderful, I had no problem doing that with the principal. I know that's why I know it was 11 period. It was no problem.
And I think this next section on the third-party survey speaks to exactly what Mr. Murphy was talking about with notification of parents and prior to administration or distribution of a third-party survey. So I think we should take it to the point. This is just a mechanism, regardless of what third-party survey we're talking about, that a teacher just can't implement a survey without notification to parents. That paragraph right there actually speaks to everything Mr. Murphy was talking about. Again, the language, the next set of language underneath that and under controversial surveys addresses the areas that we struck out. I'll just leave that up there. Correct.
Yeah, everything was changed, just.
Nothing's changed since the first reading. Same language as we did in the first reading, and as the policy currently sits under privacy, students and parents' priority rights, all that information remains the same. We look under delegation of responsibility. So there was some discussion during the first reading, so you see language change and reflected notification shall be given. I did allude to this earlier at the start of the school year, and no less than 10 school days prior to the administration of the survey. Again, somewhat of a check and balance so that parents have an opportunity to say, let's say you forgot because you're inundated with mail, notifications through Seesaw, notifications from the classroom teacher, from the school in general, that 10-day, no less than 10 days to give parents another opportunity to say, oh yeah, I forgot about that, let me opt my child out. Within a reasonable amount of time prior to the administration of any type of third-party survey. Any further thoughts, questions, or concerns about this particular policy?
So just to be clear, 40 minutes back in the schedule is not going to solve our tax issue. Just to clarify that. Right?
Okay, I would ask, what do you want to issue? Kind of, we're arguing about something that everybody else seems to think is okay.
We'll move forward and review the policy 338. So we have a policy for second reading. And I'll start with the real substantive change to this particular policy related to us codifying the process with the what is appropriate for a person to apply for sabbatical leave, and the change from other purposes, which was vague and really didn't say much, to it relating to professional development. So how are you going to improve your skill, your craft as a teacher that relates to the classroom, or if you're an administrator no changes under eligibility from the first read as well as the prior policy. And no changes under application. What you see under documentation, again, change, restoration of health sabbatical leave, and professional development. Then there's timelines within there, which again are compliant with the law. I think it's important to point out, we also had some discussion about compensation. Not that there were any concerns regarding compensation, but just an understanding of what that would look like, and again, no changes have been made to that. Any questions, thoughts, concerns?
Sorry. Okay, so our next policy meeting is scheduled for Monday, May 5th. And there's more public comment. Sorry. You think so? No.
I didn't see anybody walk out, but I'll double check. No, you're good.
For student services, you're seeing.
Okay, perfect. I did. May 5th. Monday, May 5th.
All right, we will roll right into student services. We have no public comment. So we will start with our federal programs presentation.
Good evening. So I have a brief presentation for you on really an overview of our federal programs. We'll talk about what it is we do with our federal dollars and what we're doing with our title programs, Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I think the board had seen some of Mr. Dahlberg's budget presentations talk about the total federal dollars we're receiving, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. So that is in that money comes to us in several different ways. The four that we're going to talk about here this evening, first is the National School Lunch Program. And in addition, we have the School Breakfast Program. We receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.6 million in those. Now, that is a ballpark because that's really dependent upon how many students participate, that is, how many lunches are served, how many breakfasts are served, and the level of support that the students receive. So a student could have a free breakfast, a student could have a reduced price, or a student could have it paid, and the district receives a reimbursement from the federal government at different levels based on those. So that's where that funding is going to be. We also have a school-based access program, and this funding is specifically for special education. So that's somewhere in the ballpark of $1.1 million. That money for access really goes to reimburse the district for services that students could be involved in. That is occupational therapy, physical therapy, audiology The third source of funding is the IDEA funding. That funding comes to the district through the Bucks IU. So that is, the Bucks IU is the source. So the federal dollars are going to go through there. And that's really, again, to pay for services for special education students with disabilities.
How's that divided into IU? Is that controlled by the federal government?
Yeah, it comes to the federal government. It's actually going through Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania distributes those funds through their IUs. So the IUs are going to distribute the funds to each of their schools. So those schools are going to receive, basic dollars for all the students that they have, but more than that for the level of severity of the disability the kids have. So that's why the IU really, they're the check to make sure that every district is getting the right amount. In addition to districts, that money goes to private schools as well, charter schools. That goes to all students with disabilities. Finally, what I really want to focus on tonight is to talk about what we call our federal programs. And those are our title funds. We receive almost $900,000 in title program funding across Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll talk about what those are. So, federal programs, these are these are funding that's going to be supplemental to what we're already doing. So this is money that was authorized, or programs that were authorized all the way back in 1965, with Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That was reauthorized again in 2015 in ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. So those title funds do the following. They're going to provide extra sources to ensure that there's educational equity, particularly for students who that have low economic status. And these dollars flow out to us, again, through the state. So the Pennsylvania Department of Education has an entire department just deals with federal programs. So their job is to make sure that each district is given those dollars and that those dollars are used to really meet with the goals of each one of those programs. So they're going to focus on instruction support, again, equity and enrichment. So the differences between these programs that we have. So Title I is called Improving Basic Programs. So this is going to give support for students that are in high poverty schools. So this is really based on the number of students of low income. And this is specifically for ELA and for mathematics to improve those students' academic achievement. Title II funding is supporting effective instruction. So this is generally used for professional development, or it's used for class size reduction. So that is for hiring additional instructors. It could also be used for other things. Some districts will use it to support hiring practices, to seek out and find school leaders, principals, things like that. So there are some other functions that you can use it for. Title III is for English language acquisition. So those funds are specifically for language development. So this money is to go to our English language learners, our English learners, our ELs, and our immigrant students. Title IV is for student support and academic enrichment. And this is the one that's a little bit of everything. So you're going to see safety, technology. There's a whole bunch of other things that go into Title IV, what you can essentially use it for. We do have transferability. So Title II funds and Title IV funds can actually be transferred into Title I and Title II. You can't, essentially saying, we can't transfer out of Title I and we can't transfer out of Title III, but we can put money into those programs if we have the need. We have to show that we have the need for doing that. So, Penridge School District, the way that we use our Title I funds, to start there, we have 4 schools that qualify as Title I schools. Those are West Rock Hill, Grass, Guth, and Penridge South. We have used that money for many years to really find additional people, to give additional support to each one of those school programs. So our 3 elementary schools, West Rock Hill and Grass, they're going to get an additional reading specialist. So all the elementary schools have a reading specialist in their school to help and support those kids during their small group time. They're going to have that extra time with that reading specialist to really work on fundamental skills for kids that are most in need. The schools that are identified as Title I, they have an additional reading specialist at their school, and that's what our Title I money is used for. Youth has an additional reading specialist and an additional teaching assistant to support them. And Penridge South actually has the most need. They're going to receive the most amount of funding. They have a reading specialist and a math specialist, and they have a TA. And we also transfer about $30,000 of Title IV funds to support an additional TA at South Middle School. So at South, they help kids in both English and math. And again, that would be not just during that 11 period time, but throughout the day. They'll be able to push in or pull out kids to support them in their with their ISD. So each of the Title I schools is going to use their money differently. That is, each school has to develop a school plan in the Future Ready Comprehensive Planning Portal, FRCPP. That source, or that location, is really where we do a lot of our reports and planning. So if you hear people talk about PIMS, talk about where our data is going, this is where we do that. So our comprehensive plan, that's uploaded through FRCPP. So each school is going to develop measurable goals for that academic year. They're going to look at intervention strategies based upon what their students' needs are, so they have to analyze and collect data, and they have to progress monitor throughout the year to see how those kids are achieving. So are the federal dollars doing their work for our kids? And
this in an act to prove, yes, they should keep getting them.
yes, no, let me be clear. You don't have to get there. You don't have to achieve that goal.
No,
Make sure you're getting funding,
Show me where.
but you want to show that you're collecting that data to move in that direction. And our school, all of our schools do planning like this, but it's very important to collect and do that kind of work surrounding follow those guidelines. Some districts use a system called targeted support. That is, they would only target the kids in the school that were economically disadvantaged. So they would only target those kids. So we do not do that. We use a school-wide model. So if a kid is in a Title I school, no matter how much money they have in their bank account or their parents have, those kids will be able to receive services. So in the school, we don't look for just kids that are economically disadvantaged. We look for any kid that needs help and support within that school. And that's how we identify kids to receive that support. And I would say most districts go with a school-wide system. It works a lot better. Our Title II funding, as I said, this goes for class size reduction. In our case, we could use it for professional development. We think it's better served using it for class size reduction. One, we don't have to share it with our non-pubs in our area, private schools. If you use it for professional development, you do have to share those funds equally with those. We use it for class size reduction, and we do that as to support a targeted full-day kindergarten teacher. So part of that salary is used to do specifically that. Now, one of the keys you're going to see in all federal funding is fact that we cannot supplant our funding. So we can't use our funds from the federal government to do something that we're already legally required to do, or that we are already doing. So when we have full-day kindergarten for everyone in our district, that's not something that we are going to be including for doing this. So we'll be looking at doing something else with our Title I fund, or sorry, our Title II funds to look for class size reduction. Now, that could be, do we want to have an extra kindergarten teacher? That might be something. We just have to show that by hiring that person, we're going to reduce the total class sizes across the board. For Title III, this specifically targets language instruction for our English learners. Our ELD teaching assistant at Youth is paid for through our Title III funds. And if you guys remember, Youth is really been our school that has all of our L kids. So we've already moved our level 3 students out. So right now we're just focused on the level 1 and 2 students, the students that have the greatest need at Youth. But we, in the future, are going to be sending those kids back to their own school. So we may use the money differently in that case. So we may look to have, an ELT position that's somewhere else, or that travels or is split across multiple schools. But the other way we use these funds are to support interpretation services and translation services. So we use Language Line here. So Language Line allows us to have a real-time translator that works by phone. So when we're having a meeting with a parent that's limited in their ability to speak English, we can simply call that translation service and have that happen across the telephone. We also use that funding for our Talking Points app. Talking Points, it's like our school messenger that we rolled out this year to communicate, but for our families that have other languages in the home, this does an excellent job at doing the translation for them, and we can translate PDFs, all kinds of stuff through the service, and it helps us to communicate with them in their own language. So rather than being, it's not live, this is something that we're going to be able to share this information out when we're sending things home. And finally, we use this for contracted interpreters. So if we're having an IEP meeting, we may need to call someone in to be there in person to do that translation services with us in the room. And so we contract with individuals in our community. There's people with former teachers, current teachers, and they would do that outside of their school for us, typically after school. Finally, Title IV. So Title IV, as I said, has a bunch of different components to it. It's for student support and academic enrichment. So we are required to spend certain percentages. So 20% on safe and healthy, 20% on well-rounded educational opportunities. So for safe and healthy, we fund, you can fund mental health, bullying prevention, safety. We've used that for a lot of the stuff that were recommendations from the state police audit of our buildings. Things like the county radio that we had ordered that allows our school police officers to call directly into the county system and speak to all of the local police. Our ALICE training for safety and security drills, as well as additional security equipment.
But the total from last year was 11,000.
Yeah. Title IV, so we get the lease funds, essentially. Well-rounded educational programs. This is typically used for STEM, art, music. This is something that's outside of ELA or math, because Title I really focuses on that. Title IV is something else. So we've been using that for the Bucks County. I use Fab Lab. So when you see the Fab Labs coming out, like we're setting up in grass today, to have the kids come in, that is paid for from our Title IV funds. And finally, technology. We didn't have a lot left this year. We had Edpuzzle, which will be going on its wayside for next year. So we'll be planning on using those funds some But we took $30,000 from Title IV and we transferred that into Title I to use that as additional TA. So that's how we use the funding in Title IV. Other things we're doing, components of federal programs are family and community engagement. So we need to engage with our family communities to really get buy-in. That's part of our federal programs requirements. So that happens during back to school nights. We have Title I open houses at each one of our Title schools. We have stakeholder meetings, and we will conduct needs assessment for Title II and Title IV across our each of our buildings. I will say one great example is Southfest. So Southfest is really run as a Title I event for them, and it gives a really good chance for the teachers to engage with the parent community to get them in to talk about these programs and how they're taking care of the And finally, we do provide support for students who attend private schools. So any student that lives in the Penn Ridge School District who attends a school outside of Penn Ridge or in a private school inside of Penn Ridge would certainly be able to qualify for Title I funding if they meet that requirement. So they would have to be a student of low economic or who is economically disadvantaged, and they would have to live in the zone of one of our Title I schools. This year, we only had one student attending outside that receives our Title I funding.
Take a portion of that.
Yeah, it's a per pupil expenditure. Yep. And the IU really serves as our conduit. We have a memorandum of understanding with them where the IU provides those support services at private schools. And they do that with all of the private schools across Bucks County. Any questions?
What's that risk?
I would say it's all at risk. I think our funding is a big question mark. There was a question mark coming into this year. Pennsylvania received less dollars this year, so everyone knew that our numbers were going down. I'll be going to the exciting Pennsylvania Organization of Federal Programs out in Hershey for several days of talks. And the discussion will be about that. So if you've never had 140 PowerPoint slides read to you, it's quite an experience.
So when do we know when we're getting how much for next year? Our budget is pretty short.
You don't get it till close to about June, so very near the end, they'll give us an estimate, and then we do a funding adjustment sometime in about now. There's a funding adjustment, so your numbers generally go up and down a little bit based upon what the state has, but they will essentially give it to you as you're due. So our application, our grant application, we do for June to get that in, and they will tell us. You're supposed to tell you when you go to the conference, but unfortunately last year was about a month after the grant conference.
So all those money goes through the state distribute.
They tell you what you're going to get, basically. So of that $800,000, I don't think it's an enormous part of our budget, but it is significant. It pays for really, really important things.
Each city,
Yes.
but the others could be at risk too.
I would say so. So I can't imagine a time where people are going to take money away from the National School Lunch Program, but that could happen. We get, I think I wrote it down. For a free lunch, we get $4.43.
We get per lunch from, that's more than it costs you.
that's what we receive for a student who is on free lunch. If a student has a paid lunch, we get 42 cents.
If you, well,
When a student pays for lunch, we receive 42 cents as a reimbursement.
for low,
No,
for everything.
it's to help support your lunch program. So that's why people, districts participate in the National School Lunch Program, because you do get reimbursement. It's not probably enough to pay for lunch, but it helps us.
So is the thought that if the federal Department of Education is dismantled and these monies are going to like other federal departments, that the whole grant process and all that would start over, working within whatever department ends up taking over that particular piece? Is that the best case scenario?
To me, the best case scenario is that the money just goes directly to Pennsylvania's Department of Ed and it's delivered to the school district. So, the book of universal grant guidelines is about this thick on how to complete grants and regulations and things go along with it. There are challenges to getting that money. We have to, follow those guidelines. I don't see that happening either. So, I think if we get less money, we're just going to have to make some really tough decisions because we're using these dollars to pay for people. And that's how we support teachers, TAs, those programs. So, I think they're very important to us. It's something that we're going to watch very, very closely.
Any other questions?
I mean, I've just been hearing too that like in other areas, like farming, et cetera, like as the money gets moved to different departments, it actually completely stalls. Like there's this pretty extended period where no money is moving out, and it's putting a lot of people over a barrel. Are we concerned about that as a district? That like whatever happens to the federal Department of Education, even if it stalls money coming to us for like 3 months,
That's a really good question for Sean.
Yeah.
You can talk to Sean about what those delays would look like. Clearly, if there's less people there, it's going to slow down the process of grant approval and approving, distribution of funds. So that's usually what happens.
If it's a delay, so the question is whether it's canceled.
Yes.
Delay.
or even then, like, is there a delay that we can go past this without getting more trouble? Okay.
Sean,
So just as a reminder, 1 week from today, we'll have a budget presentation, and I think we really dive in there with respect to these questions. Actually, question by the way. But it's, I've been asked several times what is happening, forecasted, just last week, last Monday, we were, superintendents from Bucks County, Secretary of Education, acting Secretary of Education, at PE, and this was the question, and we didn't get a concrete answer. So when we asked, what could we do as superintendents, it was work through PASA, which is our umbrella organization with respect to teachers, work through PSEA to try to advocate to get answers. So fortunately, our district does have some reserve funds for these types of rainy day situations. From what I read, it seems like there's been told that the monies will go to states as a pass-through. We don't know that, and you raised a very good point that there could be delays. Just like sometimes with the state budget, there are delays. Sometimes they don't pass the budget until late December. So there's a lot of unknowns in this, and it's hard for us to budget accordingly without compromising programs. But worst case scenario, we may have to scale back some of our programming for students with respect to extra staff that is funded by these revenue